Polypute works here. Shout out to my co-host Reddit Sephiroth, also known as Zach, as he left a very interesting comment on my recent video called The Best Usopp Devil Fruit Theory. And his comment reads as this: given how long the Soul Fruit has been associated with Elbaf, from Mother Caramel to Loki's dealings with Big Mom, I wonder if Mjolnir will just be a hammer homie named Thor. I think this is a very interesting alternate possibility because of this, okay? We know that homies, right? Looking at Napoleon, that when they are weapons, they can increase and shrink in size. So, like Mjolnir in Norse mythology, possibly if Usopp gets said hammer homie, it will be able to do that. Now, another thing that's super interesting is that, do we know of any other occurrences other than Napoleon in which a weapon is a homie? Technically, yes, because when we see the giant pirates for the first time, when they're introduced to us one by one under Haruden, we are introduced to the cook, whose name is Goldberg. Goldberg has a very interesting looking shield. It has a funny face and its tongue is sticking out. So that could mean that perhaps either during Caramel's time or maybe later in Big Mom's time with her dealings with Loki, that as a peace offering, she offered the giants several homie items as a peace offering, as well as offering Lola up to Loki. I think that's a very high possibility. And if one of those items is still around, it could be wielded by Loki himself. So Loki could literally have a hammer, like Zach suggested, named Thor, and it could just be a tough hammer, like with Big Mom and Napoleon. It could return to its user because, of course, it's a living creature. And in being a living creature, there's still a bit of room for it to eat a devil fruit. Because, hey, it has a mouth, it can consume a devil fruit, so we still have room for the Squirrel Association if that were to happen. Another thing that I will say that could happen is that there could be, like, say, a special property of the hammer in which it can shift its weight as well as shrink and grow. Because the funny thing about Napoleon is that Napoleon itself is a hat initially, right? When Napoleon is in battle mode, it has several modes. It has been a straight sword. It has been a cognac. It has been a cutlass. It's been a whole array of weapons. So that kind of informs me that when Big Mom, at least when she uses her own soul to make a weapon homie, that can do a large variety of things. So it's very, very likely that if she did gift a glut of homie weapons to the giants, that a hammer is one of them. And it would make sense that Loki would be given the most powerful of these weapons, because I would think that the premise for having such a weapon is that Big Mom was giving it to him as a wedding gift, and she ultimately was going to use the giants to make her pirate queen. So it makes total sense that Loki would have such a weapon, and that weapon was most likely be the most powerful of the weapons that Big Mom gifted the giants. Another factor that strengthens the idea of Thor the Hammer in this case being used as a wedding gift from Big Mom to Loki is because in Norse culture, the image of Thor's hammer Mjolnir was used as a fertility symbol in marriages. It's also associated with the growth of crops, and peasants and farmers really did enjoy Thor because he is associated with rain and thunder, which kind of goes back to having a plentiful harvest. So this also gives credence to the idea that perhaps Thor the Hammer homie in this case had some dominion over plants, which is probably where Loki got the flower to give to Lola, as we see in the anime and the manga. Now, I don't think he'll be as wild as Green Bull, but I think this is our way to get a canonical version of Benz. Now, Benz is from film Z. He had the Mosa Mosa no Mi, or the growth fruit. He fought Sanji, but the main point of his ability was that he could influence the growth of plants. And this also pairs very well with Thor the Hammer, because much like the plants that he grows, he too can grow and shrink. I can see that being a very high possibility that Big Mom would just give those abilities to him. Now, what would be funny is if during the events of Elbaf, we find out that Loki is just a goober, and in wielding Thor, the hammer itself, feels kind of unsatisfied with its wielder. So perhaps Usopp does something really cool in Elbaf, and then that inspires the hammer to follow Usopp. But the funny thing about the hammer is that maybe Loki was seen as a great warrior, but it was actually the hammer, and perhaps the hammer is the one that has all three types of hockey. So it has observation, it has conquerors, and it has armament. So perhaps in the fight that we will most likely see between Usopp and Van Augur, the hammer is literally telling Usopp where Van Augur is as an extra observation user in the fight against Van Augur, seeing as how he is a warp man. Okay, so in this situation, what if the hammer named Thor, like in Norse mythology, could return to its user, much like how those homie cannonballs changed their trajectory in Whole Cake Island? If you recall, Nami convinced the cannonballs that the Straw Hats were in another direction, and the group of cannonballs simply went that direction. So what in this situation, the hammer could actually return to Usopp upon Usopp's call. This will be interesting too in the fight against Van Augur, because if Van Augur tries to warp away from Usopp with the hammer on his person, Usopp can literally drag Van Augur back to his location as long as Van Augur is holding Thor the Hammer. Or perhaps he could sneak Thor the Hammer onto Van Augur's person, and then wherever Van Augur is, he can simply call the hammer, and the hammer drags Van Augur towards Usopp, which allows Usopp to shoot Van Augur.